Hello, I'm LCK and welcome to the review of the Liiv Sandbox and T1 series in the second half of the spring round robin. You know how it goes here, we're all about the drafts. And yeah, before that, T1's roster again has changed quite a lot. We see Oner's debut today. In the top lane it stays with Zeus, but in the mid lane closer for Faker and Teddy for Gumayushi. But probably this is due to him playing against Effort. But let's get it going with game number 1. In the ban phase, Irelia, Renekton and Nidalee are taken away. Irelia versus Closer and Nidalee. If you look at Oner's OP.gg, you see that he plays her quite a lot in solo queue, and alongside Renekton, as Zeus and Oner have played in the past, they deny this obvious top lane synergy. On the other side, Gnar, Seraphine and Rell, well, two of them are quite busted at the moment, so the bans do make sense. And T1 banning Seraphine as they are not capable of playing her themselves is also quite understandable. The first pick Kai'Sa here. She's strong but not quite hot, so she's a bit overrated here. Great laner and her short range also can be punished quite a lot, so it doesn't make too much sense to see the very high priority here. T1 going for Thresh Aphelios, the T1's special bot lane here, this game without Gumayushi, but the OG Fountain Laser in Teddy, so yeah, he can obviously play the champ as well, getting into a very strong bot lane here for T1. Udyr R0 rotation for Sandbox. Udyr into the T1 bot lane already kinda meh, and with Kai'Sa they have a setup for a very forward moving team identity. He can be a bit more of a stationary DPS source. He can function as a tier 2 engage as well, which moves along with the rest of his team so far. So the question is already, will Sandbox be able to kill Aphelios, or will his flash of Thresh be able to move him to safety so that he then can kill them all? In the first half is Syndra for Closer, one of the Closer can play in the mid lane, and it's a standard and safe matchup into the R0. So a bit reliant on Thresh's W in terms of safety, but the problem is Aphelios will obviously be the one to receive that. It cannot really be guaranteed. For Closer, a bit of a simpler champion Syndra is also quite good, as he does not have to do so many flashy plays, which has not really worked out too well for him in the past. Next ban phase, Olaf Ornn. So yeah, that's a good ban, Olaf taking it away from T1, who have shown high priority on the pick. For them, I feel it's good that they are not playing Olaf, so yeah, Sandbox really helping them out here a bit. On the other side, Nautilus versus Effort and Aatrox against Summit, two staple picks for both of these players. For the next rotation, can obviously be flexed into the jungle position, which is missing, and the top lane. I really like the pick here for top. It neutralizes most matchups and also is a nice team fighter, also denying the potential who can obviously do fairly well against Aphelios and Syndra with his ultimate. On the Effort and Camille for Summit. Camille obviously not doing too much against Gragas early on, but will obviously outscale him into the later stages. Alistar and Kai'Sa, a very solid bot lane, has had good amount of success in the LCK, and Alistar is obviously another form of tier 1 engage into T1's rather immobile backline. Works Graves then picked up for Oner. I have not found any information about him playing the champion personally, but Grave, as he has fallen out of favor for most junglers, still does very much damage. Alongside with the other high damage sources of T1, they've built a triple threat damage team here, which can obviously punish failed Sandbox engagers even harder and add another target onto the list for their engage, so either they get Aphelios and Syndra and Graves kill them. A clear Udyr though has not really found a great lane to play around. The top lane will not be really hard in their favor, as the Gragas is a defensive block here. Mid lane obviously with the Syndra and the Azir will be a farm fest, which will be mostly in an even state. The Azir can help him somewhat with his ultimate, but that's only after level 6, so he has to wait for quite a bit. And the bot lane obviously, not only considering the player strength, but the champions as well, will be in T1's favor, but T1 obviously should anticipate that they will be overextending here. as they have the red side terrain for their bot, only has really one avenue to attack, and a clever ward in one of these positions here can mostly sniff out any gank potential, and obviously Thresh W also exists to save Aphelios should the gank come. T1 also, not only considering the Udyr but the rest of them as well, obviously very problematic against Aphelios, who really likes that kind of style, especially with bruisers who lack the immediate burst damage to one-shot him. Yes, Azir can do something, but Teddy's positioning has been very crisp and flash does exist. Later on, to defend their inner turrets and have Camille split push in either side lane, because obviously she will beat the Gragas in the 1v1 at the 2 and 3 item stages and even further on. Gragas can go for the Vomox to somewhat deny the split push scenario, but we're seeing also a TP here on Azir, and he can do a similar strategy as well. T1 really lacks engage, besides the Gragas who will be in the side lane, so a split push scenario could really be hurtful for T1, as they also then lack their front line to really force too much, and can't really tank up Baron as well if Gragas is here in the side lane. As such, Sandbox, while they do lack early pressure, should come the late game they have a clear strategy to the win. For T1, with their high damage comp and multiple threats, their success comes from snowballing the individual lanes and the individual player power. The Gragas here, the only front line, has a bit of and has to ignore Camille from time to time, which can be hurtful as I already alluded to, but should these teamfights come, T1, considering their player level, has the edge here, and that's also the reason how they push on ahead in the game and secure the first win here. The split push really has become a problem as the game drags out for quite a bit, but hard and aggressive macro calls from T1, as well as really astonishing good play from Thresh, from Carrier's Thresh here, has put T1 in winning situations and turned dire situations in their favor. Aphelios teamfight them really oppressive. Kai'Sa, not too much she can really do against Syndra and Graves in these same fights, considering also that the Udyr is not really accelerated in the game due to not having an early game lead, which then makes him even a weaker version of Olaf in a sense. So yeah, T1 able to win the first game on the back of some teamfights, and starting the game number 2, we see moves to the blue side obviously, keeps the same bans as before with Rel, Gna and Seraphine. A pick that really has to be banned in my opinion, as he's not super strong, but he has a high presence in the LCK, so it's understandable from their perspective why he needs to be banned. On the other side, adding the Aphelios onto their 3 bans from the first game. I'm not really happy with this. A Thresh ban would have been way better. First of all, Aphelios is not Teddy's only champion, and especially for Teddy he is the AD carry of T1 with a larger champion pool without the Aphelios, instead banning the Thresh. Thresh also would have disabled Aphelios' potential, as Aphelios is really reliant on the Thresh in multiple scenarios, the lane and overall the game state. And obviously considering the first game's performance of Carrier's Thresh, it's more ban-worthy than the Aphelios in my opinion. Coming to the first pick here, again the Kai'Sa. Still dislike this first pick, so I'm not going into it again. Udyr again picked up, so this is even worse this time, because Sandbox has seen that T1 is indeed stronger in the laning phase, indeed stronger individually, so picking a champion that relies on their leads, relies on team leads, obviously not too smart here. Instead of enabling his lanes to do better, it's a pick that needs his lanes to help him, so it makes little sense. And is highly likely. Samira here versus Kai'Sa. Individually it's not really doing too much. She is not really pressuring her too much in lane. Later on Samira as well as the Udyr needs a good early game to snowball and then pop off. Also Samira picked so early allows T1 here with 4 additional picks to counter her even more so, as she's rather susceptible to lockdown and CC. So 2 picks here, maybe 3, that already kinda meh. T1 continues with Nidalee Alistar, so Alistar into the Samira in combination with the Kai'Sa, obviously very strong. Even though it didn't work out for Sandbox in the first game, it was not really the champion's fault per se. So the Alistar is really fine here. The Nidalee not so much, so for Oner it's a very comfort pick, so it's a bit more understandable for him personally. Nidalee obviously not the strongest champion in the meta at the moment, so Lilia is just way better in the damage department later on, and with the Moon Stuff build still being very overpowered and still being very potent, Lilia obviously utilizes this even more so. Nidalee into the Udyr, if we are not seeing the Bruiser build that was played in the NA LCS. This is also quite dangerous for her, but considering that this is T1, which obviously will have 3 winning lanes in most scenarios, which obviously can help Nidalee even more and set her up to success, this could work better than you might expect. Rounding up the first half here for Sandbox with the Nautilus pick. Nautilus against Kai'Sa and Nidalee, very punishing, especially against Nidalee obviously. So in that sense it's quite good. With the Samira, has some potency in skirmishes. Problem again for the lane, so Samira is not doing too well against Alistar Kai'Sa. That has already been established and is already quite clear. Nautilus does not really offer too much either. Nautilus can't really do much against Alistar in lane, and unless Teddy is misstepping and is being able to get Q comboed by the Nautilus, there is not really much Sandbox can do in the lane again. So relying on Teddy's mistakes for this pick to really work out in the crucial phase of the game is again not really too smart. So as I mentioned, Sandbox being a bit arrogant here and thinking that they can punish T1 on an individual level, which is obviously not really consistent with what we have seen from both teams in the past and even in the first game. So the second phase bans Camille and Azir, so banning the 2 solo laners from the last game. Obviously on a mental level that's quite smart to get the somewhat successful picks away from them, and both also would do fairly well against Kai'Sa, who so far is the main focus of T1's comp here. On the other side the Zeus and the Yone, so obviously for the individual players these bans do apply, but additionally for the Nidalee we can see the AD solo laners obviously being way better with her, so taking 2 of them away from her obviously intends to weaken her early game power and the 2v2 potential in either top and mid. Starting with the second, either in the jungle in most cases, but obviously with the Udyr lock-in and the Nautilus lock-in, Gragas flex potential is non-existent, so it's obviously Gragas support, Gragas top lane, excuse me. Again, I repeat, quite a good pick here for Sandbox. I think it's a smart decision to limit the map to just the mid lane and the bot lane and ignore the top lane in a sense, so that they can get their Samira and in a winning position with the help of Udyr and ignore top lane altogether. A bit more like of a sacrifice for the top lane, but maybe that's the win condition for them. Sion and Zoe. Sion, a pick that has seen more and more play globally, especially in EU as a support position for example, but also in the top lane in Korea. Does fairly tank matchup, so yeah, that's kinda more player dependent. with his high. He is quite nice with Nidalee again as a somewhat AD top laner. His engage with his ultimate also does fairly well against what Sandbox has. Not too potent, but it's okay. And yeah, the pick also gives some more frontline potential for the T1 comp here, that with the Zoe has now completely locked themselves into a poke focused comp. So yeah, it's really well rounded with the Sion pick here. The Zoe obviously for closer, a well established pick. Fine in mid lane. With the Nidalee obviously it's a bit meh, as we have an AP jungler and AP mid laner, but the sleep can obviously now be triggered by both the Zoe Q and a long range Nidalee spear for a massive amount of damage. Alongside with Kai'Sa, they have really good poke potential here. And the Sion, as I mentioned, rounds up the comp with engage potential for comebacks and also a front line to safely poke the enemy in standoffs in the river region. Rounding up Sandbox comp is the Orianna for Fate. So Orianna versus Zoe, a more boring and more calm matchup here in the mid lane. Orianna obviously very immobile, as is Zoe obviously, but Orianna often the victim of Alistar roams, which is a specialty of carrier here. As I mentioned, T1's comp do well in many scenarios in the early game, obviously not only because of the player level, but of the initiate power of some of the champions. In the mid game with the spikes on 1 or 2 items, and then later on with Kai'Sa scaling, Sion being a very beefy boy, and yeah, the potential snowball that they have from the early and mid game stages. On the other side, Sandbox again with a bit more aggressive comp here, which obviously, as I mentioned very early on, is not really the style they should use to win. Orianna does enable the Udyr a bit better than the Azir did before, but as obvious say, that can then help in roams in any scenario. Good game from all of their individual parts, closer obviously picking up most of the kills and yeah, landing an absurd amount of bubbles helps T1 push this to a 2-1 victory here against Sandbox, which obviously is somewhat understandable and predictable, but T1 after the devastating loss against Dragon X, this is a much needed win. Decent debut for Oner here with 100% win record in the LCK. Was not too astonishing of a performance, but we can already see somewhat that he's a very capable player. Closer with his more comfort pick of Zoe than the Sunderer, performing way better, so the issue still remains that he has a more limited pool of comfort champions. But the major undermining winner here I think is Teddy. He really made a great argument for himself, as he is now, like Gumayushi, winning the laning phase very aggressively, but more so snowballing that lead onto the team and onto the further game states, which is something Gumayushi has been lacking somewhat. The overall structure and the macro of T1 also has somewhat improved, considering that Faker is not playing and we have 3 very aggressive and more hesitant rookies in the later stages, so seeing a bit smarter rotations here from T1 without the usual hesitancy is also something that can be worked upon. The draft in the first game obviously had clear weak points, but the second draft year was absolutely solid, had a clear identity to fight as I mentioned, and yeah, the Sion and Addition really rounding up the comp very well. It was not a Jace that would obviously offer more poke, but would obviously be a bit of a liability in terms of focus, right? T1 obviously wants to have some support for Teddy, even if they're not hard ganking his lane, they at least want Oner to shadow a bit around there. So getting a Jace here onto the top side that would need a lot of attention and is very susceptible to Udyr ganks would have been a very poor decision. So getting the Sion here really reserved and also very competent pick. In addition, I have that obviously went by accident because the item was rushed here. It's very promising, and yeah, it seems T1 has picked up a few ideas from other regions in terms of item building, or at least they have read the patch notes. Sadly, we don't see moon stuff on Nidalee. In this case, you could argue for different builds, as I mentioned already, the Bruiser build. Here he went with the full damage build, which, well, yeah, it amplifies the poke of the Nidalee. But obviously, the moon stuff is very, very powerful, but you could debate this decision here. Thanks for watching till the end. This will conclude the review of the Liiv Sandbox vs T1 series. Hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, what do you think about the continuous roster changes? Here, today the rookie roster worked out, and maybe the aggression will work in the future. But yeah, this was against Liiv Sandbox, the 10th place team, so one has to expect a result like this. We have to see again in the next week roster brings, and maybe Oner will continue to play, but that's something we have to see in the future. That's it for now though. Please stay safe, have a great day, till next time.